Basis is expected, if not required, our legs are another story. Skin is, once again, in. Could the resurgence of rising hemlines be a response to pandemic-era restrictions? I'm Hamish Bowles, Vogue's global editor-at-large, and from the leggy liberation of the 1960s youthquake to the barely there microskirts from the spring 2022 runways, I'm here to tell you everything you need to know about the miniskirt. When we think about the miniskirt in mainstream contemporary culture and fashion, we might think first of the swinging 60s, but it actually has a far, far older history. It appears that many, from noblemen in ancient Egypt to the ladies of Don Chin Miao, favoured the revealing wardrobe piece we know and love today. In European and American fashion, the long hemlines of women's skirts began inching their way up in the early 20th century. And all those scandalised by a bare ankle were soon to be rocked by the roaring 1920s and the enormously popular flapper girl era. With Josephine Baker's iconic banana skirt and la mode sportive made popular by Coco Chanel and legendary tennis player Suzanne Lenglen and her designer Jean Patou, women's legs were both on display and on the move. Some began speculating that the length of women's skirts was somehow intrinsically linked to the booming stock market, and thus the hemline index, the theory that hemlines rise in times of economic growth and fall in times of strife, was born. But what goes up must always come down. And the stock market crash of 1929 once again sparked a more conservative approach to women's fashion. During the Second World War, fabric rationing, introduced to prioritise uniforms over fashion, necessarily made skirts skimpier. After the war, Christian Dior's new look brought long, full skirts into fashion, and it wasn't until the 1950s that rock and roll and youth dance crazes bred the need for shorter outfits women could groove in more freely. Couture and Hollywood soon followed suit. Whether it was Balenciaga's above-the-knee sack dress, Yves Saint Laurent's trapeze line for Dior in 1958, or the costumes in science fiction and space-age films of the moment, everyone got the hint. The miniskirt, and its official moniker, took over the global fashion stage during what Vogue's Diana Vreeland called a youthquake. And like the 20s before it, the style of the 60s was influenced by and for a youth culture that was pushing boundaries and exploring sexual identity in a rapidly changing society. Mary Quant, often considered to have invented the miniskirt, although that is up for discussion, was a design leader in the London boutique movement, inspired by schoolgirls' dresses and the short skirts of tap dancers. Soon, everyone who was anyone couldn't be spotted without one. It was then that Courrèges achieved international acclaim for his 1964 collection, featuring miniskirts with an haute couture twist, while Paco Rabanne and Emmanuel Ungaro utilised metals, industrial plastics and synthetics to create ultra-modern, space-age accessories and garments. Not everyone, however, was on board the miniskirt spaceship. Many schools banned students from skirts above the knee. That's to say nothing of the fashion elite's disapproval, famously including Coco Chanel. She considered knees a woman's ugliest feature. But that didn't stop 39-year-old Jacqueline Kennedy from wearing this Valentino dress to her 1968 wedding to Aristotle Onassis. The miniskirt, it seemed, could transcend space, time, and age. The 1970s saw some respite from the mini-mania, thanks to the hippie era's long-flowing skirts and bell-bottoms. But by the 1980s, the miniskirt re-emerged as the answer for women everywhere. Frilly rah-rah skirts, working girl suits, and the unisex plaid kilts designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier in 1984 offered a new versatility to the item. And the craze hardly slowed its roll. Versace's bold printed or monochromatic minis and power suits and Karl Lagerfeld's twist on Chanel's classic looks of the 1960s reinvigorated the mini for the MTV generation. The early aughts saw the invention of the mini-mini or the microskirt, with the help of these paparazzi-obsessed it girls making the low-rise, highly cropped and often denim version a touchstone of the era. Now, almost 20 years later, that miniskirt is back, thanks in part to Miu Miu's Spring-Summer 2022 collection. What was once a look perpetuated by mainly tall, thin and young women of the 1960s is now a trend for people of all shapes, ages and gender identities. And whether the miniskirt's return is due to nostalgia for decades past or a symbol of future economic growth, we can all agree that perhaps less really is more.